Welcome to My Dog Ate My Book Report, a podcast where two weirdo 30-somethings take turns introducing each other to a formative book from childhood the other has never read. I'm Brandon, he, him, and, Wren, I've decided to run away from home, and I've chosen you to accompany me.
You only want me to come with you because I have $23 whole.
That's correct. I've got like $5. So, from the Mixed Up Files of Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler, which I'll probably just call, like, Mixed Up Files or something for short. It's a 1967 novel, written and illustrated by E.L. Konigsburg. It was one of her first. It's the story of Claudia and Jamie Kincaid, who run away from home to live in the Metropolitan Museum of Art in New York. While there, they discover Angel, a statuette of unconfirmed provenance, and determine that they will solve the mystery themselves. I don't think there are any content warnings for the book, except for maybe, I don't know, learning that Michelangelo is not just a Ninja Turtle.
I thought about it. I feel like if people are troubled with themes of homelessness, it could be seen as sort of making light of that a little bit, but that's as far as I got in terms of thinking about what could be problematic about this book.
There's
I don't know, entitled White Connecticut Kids, content warning.
Touching a bunch of stuff that you're not supposed to touch at a museum. Even when I was younger, I did have a certain horror at what they were doing.
Now, have you been to the Metropolitan Museum of Art?
I actually have not, sadly. I've spent very little time ever in New York City at all, and what little time I did have, I did not spend at the Met.
I thought about that while I was reading because I know that, I'm on the East Coast and not that far, so I've been there. And you were raised in the East Coast, but you have since moved far away from there. So I was sitting there thinking, oh, there's a good chance Brandon has not actually been to this museum.
Growing up in Virginia, and specifically in the southerner part of Virginia, New York was always just kind of far away. And in general, my parents never really liked big cities or whatever. So they just tend to be vacation choices for my family. And if we ever went to museums, and that was something that my grandmother actually did a lot, she was very invested in exposing my brother and I to museums and other sort of educational vacations and stuff. The Smithsonian in DC was much closer, and much easier to have a lot of varied museums in easy walking distance of each other and everything.
Oh, now I'm envious because I've never been there.
Oh, yeah. I've been to the Smithsonian a lot.
I've driven through DC, but I've never actually stopped to see anything there. So that's, yeah.
There's some phenomenal museums at the Smithsonian. But yeah, so this book, this was a book I encountered in 5th grade. We actually did read it for class. It wasn't something that I read of my own accord technically, but as occasionally happens with books you have to read for school, I really liked it and plowed through it much faster than I had to keep up with the requirements for the class. I just really got into initially the figuring out how to live in the museum element. Then once the sort of mystery part pops up, I just really wanted to know the answer. I think I had always been into mysteries before this book, but I think this book kind of introduced the notion of the idea that things in museums could still be mysterious, and that there can be a lot of investigation and research that goes into something as seemingly simple as knowing who made a particular work of art. I think prior to this, all the mysteries I knew were things that either had gone missing and were never found, or like crime mysteries, right? And this kind of, I think, introduced me to the notion that there was another kind of mystery, and that research could be like intriguing as an investigative thing. And also, this is probably the first time that I ever really encountered Michelangelo as an artist. I knew that all the Ninja Turtles were named after artists, but like the only one of those artists that I really had any context for besides just knowing that they existed was Da Vinci. So I remember this being like the first time that I ever really encountered the actual Michelangelo in any sort of context. I think I glossed over this, but the museum believes that this statue angel is a lost work of Michelangelo. So there's a lot of talk about Michelangelo.
I'm trying to think if I read this as a kid, if I would have had any concept other than Ninja Turtles myself, but I don't think so. I was not a particularly cultured child, and I don't think I really encountered works by those types of artists until probably later elementary school. They did a lot of focus on Van Gogh and Monet. Not Monet, Monet. I was not an art student. They did a lot of focus on, you know, the pretty arts.
Yeah. And like
not statues and things.
More recent art, relatively speaking. I feel like, you know, Da Vinci's the obvious one that I think pretty much everybody encounters first. Michelangelo is probably the second most recognized, just because of the Sistine Chapel ceiling. But I think he's a distant second.
I don't think I can even think right now of what Donatello did.
Donatello was a sculptor, I believe, but I cannot name any of his works. So we did talk a lot of last time about like the sort of feeling of survival and roughing it in the wilderness and everything, and how I was never like super that, and I was never like, oh man, I wish I could be camping all the time or something like that. But I did appreciate Claudia's plans, because I also don't like to empty waste paper baskets. And I also think it would be pretty cool to live in a museum. To your point, like Claudia, so Claudia is really the main character here. This book is really about her kind of struggling to find herself at a formative age. She's 12. And like a lot of this story kind of ends up being about her sort of feeling out her transition into, not adulthood yet, certainly, but like from child to less of a child, I guess. Maybe not teenager yet, but tween. And it's not for any terrific reason. It's not like to escape a bad home or because a plane crashed into the Met with her in it. It's because she's tired of chores and having to sometimes watch her youngest brother, and has decided that she's going to leave now, and recruits her younger but not youngest brother, Jamie, because he's frugal and she wants his money.
Yeah, I didn't like Claudia as a human being.
She's a little bit of a sociopath.
I understood her a lot by the end. I still felt like I didn't like her all that much.
Mm-hmm.
But definitely in the beginning, when she was going over her plan and talking about the injustice of having to clean the garbage, and that's why she's going to run away. But she doesn't like gross things or bugs, so she's going to run away somewhere posh. I just sort of set the book down and I was like, oh gosh, I'm going to hate this girl, aren't I? She's very Connecticut. I have friends I love from Connecticut, but I think they'll agree with me.
I'm glad to know that there's some real like experience captured in this character. Speaking as a person who grew up in the South, I don't have that point of reference as much. This is not, I never knew anybody who would run away to the Met. I wish I did.
But I do recognize that a little bit of her are some things that I didn't really like about myself all that much as a child because, and I don't know if this is the discussion question that you've got hidden from me, but I did try to run away once as a child. Because it was when my youngest brother was a baby and I was irritated about it. I was maybe 9. I took my middle brother with me.
Mm-hmm.
We walked up the street for maybe 45 minutes. And then we walked back.
I definitely did that kind of running away at least one time when I was a child, where it sort of was a bluff, I think, mostly, just to see like how far my parents let me get before they caved, and I think the answer was they did not cave, and I caved.
I really want to know what the parents thought when they. So Claudia runs away and mails her family the letter explaining why she runs away, talking about the injustice. I was very hung up on her word injustice because it just bothered me so much. None of this is injustice, you little. Anyway, and they don't tell us really how the parents reacted other than that they were worried and they called the authorities and things. But I was very, very curious to know what they thought when they read that letter.
Yeah.
I'm also very curious what your parents thought when you tried to run away, because that just is so funny to me. Just imagining small Brandon just like stamping his feet. All right, I'm leaving now. Bye. And your parents are like, "Yeah, you're 8. You're
with some stuff in a wagon.
You're coming back in 10 minutes."
Yeah. Well, I have to imagine that in Claudia's parents' case, this couldn't have felt too much like a surprise, right? I have to imagine Claudia was a handful. I imagine the bigger surprise is that like she went through with it and took Jamie, right? Yeah, it's hard. They don't really give us that because this whole book is presented as being written by Mrs. Frankweiler to her lawyer. So some of the parts that we don't get are things that either she didn't care to really research or didn't care to repeat at the very least. And she didn't really seem to care all that much about how the Kincaids felt. She was much more interested in Claudia and Jamie and their adventure. So that's the part we get.
Yeah, the framing of the book was definitely really interesting because it starts off with the aforementioned Mrs. Basil E. Frankweiler being really snarky to her lawyer. And I was sitting there like, why is she so snarky at this guy? Yeah, sure, like it's funny to be grumpy at lawyers. It's kind of a recurring trope, but why specifically? And then, it kind of comes to light at the end why she's being so snarky with him about this particular topic, which I thought was hilarious.
Mm-hmm.
But the particular framing of the story did make me pause about a third of the way through, and I wrote myself a little prediction, which was wrong, but I want to fess up to it.
Yeah, do it.
My prediction was, based on the framing of the notes to her lawyer and the altering of her will. Right, that's a little detail. The book starts with, "Hey, lawyer, I'm going to be snarky at you, but also change my will." Anyway, so I wrote, "I am guessing that they are going to thwart a robbery in this museum. Or they somehow prove that the statue is real."
Well, now I'm thinking of Home Alone, but in a museum.
Well, I wasn't sure where it was going at that point, and I was like, there's got to be some reason why they've caught the attention of this random lady.
Yeah.
So those were my guesses. I was wrong.
Yeah. Well, and the thing about it, the thing about this book is that the titular Mrs. Frankweiler doesn't actually show up in the story until the very, very end, which is interesting from a standpoint of titles, right? Because it sort of feels like you're 75% through the book and you're like, I have heard of Mrs. Frankweiler. I've yet to see her or her mixed up files.
Yeah, I one of my notes that I have here is that I would definitely like to know more about Mrs. Frankweiler. Why is there not more? There are no sequels. Give me more details about this woman. She's fascinating.
There's an itty bitty sequel.
I know, I read it. It's in the back. It's like 2 pages.
Yeah. Well, she was based on a couple people that Konigsburg knew. In fact, most of the characters in this book were based pretty directly on people in her life. Claudia and Jamie were both pretty heavily two of her children, who also posed for the art. But Mrs. Frankweiler was primarily based on the headmistress of a school that Konigsberg had taught science in for a time prior to this. And so that's where like a lot of her personality comes from. This headmistress was apparently also a very sort of direct, matter-of-fact individual.
Well, she's just, so by the end of the book, when they meet Mrs. Frankweiler, she's just this no-nonsense, but also chaotic older lady. And there are aforementioned mixed up files. She makes the kids go through this little test to find files in this wall of file cabinets. And
yeah.
She
is an agent of chaos, like for sure. And we're never entirely told what her filing system is either. She mentions that it makes sense to her, and it doesn't immediately make sense to Claudia or Jamie. They kind of imply that things are filed by location, but like alpha by place in the world that they're relevant in or that things happened in, rather than necessarily who they're about. More specific spoilers now, I guess, for this story if you've gotten this far, but still want to be able to read it for yourself. The museum is showing off a new bronze that had been acquired on the cheap, and that some people suspect was a lost work of Michelangelo, but there was not sufficient evidence to confirm that for sure. And Claudia and Jamie's efforts to confirm that for sure ultimately lead them to Mrs. Frankweiler, because Mrs. Frankweiler is who sold the statue to the Met in the first place. And so they do find that she has more information about the statue that she did not give to the Met. And she continues to not want to give it to the Met. just because, like basically the change in her will that you mentioned is specifically to leave the evidence of the statues genuinely being made by Michelangelo to Claudia and Jamie, and if they want to give it to the museum, sure, it'll be theirs, but she does not want to give it to the museum herself. Or during her lifetime, because she just kind of likes to watch the world burn, I guess.
Yeah, she says a couple of things like, I could have donated this object to that museum, but I didn't want to give them anything.
Yeah.
It's just like, you're so ridiculous. I like you.
Yeah. But at the same time, like there is the element of the statue that we're told in a couple cases is that the museum got it for a very good price, especially if it is a Michelangelo. And so it's not even just about, she doesn't like donating. She kind of makes a stand against donating in general, but also if she had included the evidence when she auctioned the thing, it would have gone for a lot more. So she also does not care about money per se.
Yeah.
She just kind of doesn't want to give them the satisfaction of knowing.
So it's important to note that this very beginning catalyst of this story, the children deciding to run away, and them meeting Mrs. Frankweiler are the very, very, very beginnings and ends of this book. And there was a journey to get there of two children running around the Met at night,
Yeah.
which, as you said, is horrifying, like touching things they're not supposed to.
Not just
And
touching them. Like, you
yeah,
slept
so
in a freaking bed.
they slept in a bed that was, I forget what it was, but
Oh, don't worry. I looked all of these things up.
this historical bed. I had things to say about that. Things at a museum are so meticulous, and I really want to know, did they remake that bed perfectly every morning? Because they don't talk about whether or not, they just say, okay, we got up and we got dressed and we hid in the bathroom, which I also have comments about. But I feel like for somebody to have been sleeping in a bed in the museum and the museum staff to not notice that, these children must have been amazing at making beds.
Yeah. Well, maybe among the other injustices they suffered was being forced to make their beds every morning. When this book was written, it was free to get in the Met, so like being there during the day was not a big deal. They could kind of come and go. There were enough school tours; they were able to blend in. And then at closing time, they would go to the bathrooms, stand on the toilets so that their feet couldn't be seen under the stall, and waited basically for everyone to be gone. And had kind of a sense of like the one security guard or whatever who patrolled at night where he was going to be. And then they would go and sleep in this bed before getting up in the morning, hiding in the bathrooms in the time between when staff showed up and the museum actually opened, and then repeating the whole process. The bed in particular was a state bed that was allegedly the scene of the death, maybe murder, of Amy Robsart, the first wife of Lord Robert Dudley. I looked this up. So there's a lot of items in the museum are mentioned in this book, and with the exception of Angel, all of them are things that exist. Not all of them are still on display anymore, but they are all things that at least were at one point. And this bed was, like I said, an Elizabethan bed from the 16th century. We also learn offhand that Mrs. Frankweiler apparently also sleeps in a 16th century bed of her own.
Yeah.
Why not? And although I couldn't really find too much information about this specific bed, the sort of backstory there is that Amy Robsart is or was the wife of the Duke of Leicester, and that guy, Robert Dudley, was purportedly Queen Elizabeth I's favorite. Basically, like, there was a rumor that the Queen loved him, but couldn't marry him because he was already married. But when he went to work for the Queen, Amy didn't go with him. She kind of hung out in the country, and then one day she turned up dead at the bottom of some stairs.
Let's see. They had sort of interesting habits. Every 4 days they went to the laundromat.
Yep.
And they ruined their clothes because, of course, they didn't know how to do their own laundry.
Yeah, they had no idea.
So they shrunk sweaters and accidentally dyed their clothes gray because there was something black in the whole load. I thought that was funny. Because
Yeah.
I've encountered a lot of affluent children who just don't know how to do very basic things like laundry, and that makes just a lot of sense.
Yeah.
I'm gonna go even more basic. Things like how to hold a broom. So I think the thing that horrified me the most was that when it was time to take a bath, they took a bath in the wishing fountain.
Yeah. What else were they going to take a bath in?
Yeah. It's so gross.
Well, and then they realized that, so a big part of this was that Claudia planned this based upon having enough funds to support them, and that's why she recruited Jamie, because he saved all of his allowances and also cheated at war on the bus for money. So he was a gambler who cheated, and so he had money, $24 and some change.
Hey, it's the 60s. That was
It's the
quite a bit of money.
60s, and it was much more than Claudia had. So there was always this sort of like ongoing thing about their funds and Claudia wanting to do things that sometimes Jamie just kind of petulantly would be like, nope, we don't have the money for it. Because they didn't always get along. They definitely butted heads at times. But they realized that they could just start taking the change out of the fountain when they took baths.
So they're stealing other people's wishes.
Stealing other people's wishes, yeah. That's correct. That's how that works. The fountain is apparently no longer there exactly. It sounds like it's been replaced by a different fountain.
Yeah. One of the funny things is that they don't steal anything else. They make a big deal at one point about stealing a newspaper from somebody who had set it down because they were done with it. And then they have to like pray for forgiveness or something for stealing that. But they don't steal from the snack bar. I feel like if I was in this situation, I would have, just gone to the snack bar at night and taken food. Like, so they make this big deal about not stealing anything. Except then they steal all these people's wishes, and I have a much bigger problem with them stealing the wishes of people rather than stealing some corporation's food at their snack bar.
To be clear,
the
notion that they're stealing wishes does not exist in the book. They're just stealing the coins. But I understand what you're getting at.
Yeah, no, the notion that they're stealing wishes came from me.
Yeah.
They're stealing all the coins that people put in this fountain to make wishes on.
Yeah. Yeah, they have a very like arbitrary code of conduct here, obviously, since like they're not supposed to be in the museum. They're not supposed to sleep in this bed. And hide their stuff in sarcophagi and things like that. But yeah, they don't steal for the most part.
There were a couple of things as well about their schedule that baffled me. I think I guess this kind of lines up with the fact that I'm reading this for the first time as an adult, so some of the magic is a little lost on me. I'm sitting there thinking to myself, how are they waking up in time? They don't have alarm clocks.
That's a good question.
How are they how does the bathroom trick work when there's janitors and such that are going to come clean toilets? They're going to get caught, but they don't. It gave me a lot of anxiety to read this book just because I'm sitting there thinking, oh gosh, there's going to be cleaners. There's going to be this. Somebody's going to come in early one day before they've woken up because they don't have an alarm clock. So I read the whole book slightly stressed out, just waiting for them to get caught.
Yeah.
And they never do. Spoiler alert.
Well, Jamie does come out of the stall a little early and run into a janitor. And the janitor is like, where did you come from? And Jamie says, my mother always said that I came from heaven, and then takes a bow and leaves.
That was amazing.
Which was, the best. They are only in the museum for like a week. It's not like they dodged detection for months. They were there for a week. But there are a couple times that they do have to go find places in galleries to hide, waiting for people to pass. Like there's one of the nights where people come in to move Angel to a different part of the museum, and they hadn't planned on that, but there is a bit of a close call there, because there's more people in the museum after hours than they expected. And Jamie actually realizes this when he's in the men's bathroom, because some men come into the men's bathroom and he hears them talking. But by then Claudia's in the women's bathroom and they don't have any way to communicate to each other. So he's really worried that she will like leave as usual, not realizing there are people to avoid. But they kind of get lucky, and I think they hide for a little while behind the security desk or something like that, or the information desk. There's some talk of it, but yeah, they do they do manage to stay undetected for an implausibly long time.
I don't want my saying that I had all these nitpicks to make you think that I didn't enjoy it.
Oh no,
I read the book in 2 sittings, which could have easily been 1, but the first night I was super sleep deprived and I fell asleep about a third of the way through. There were things that I thought about coming at this story from an adult, like, that stressed me out.
Oh yeah, I also definitely thought about things that I had never really thought about before, because I've read this book a couple times, but it's been a long time since the last time I read this book. So certainly some of my perspective on things is different now. It's I was pleased to come back to it and find that I still really enjoyed it. It's a very funny book, I think, which is reportedly partially because when Konigsburg was writing it, she would read sections to her children, and if they didn't laugh, she would change them. She would rewrite it. So like that was by design, and I really appreciate this book's sense of humor. A lot of it is just kind of very wry, and it's not slapstick or anything. It's kind of stuff that I think probably when I read it previous times, some of it went over my head a bit, but some of it is also just really charming. Like I find the fact that Claudia really wants to hug the statue and gets upset that other people hug the statue to be sort of weirdly charming.
Yeah, she and Jamie get this little tiff because she's envious that the people that moved the statue got to hold the statue to move it. And Jamie's just like, you are getting in this whole statue thing a little deep, sis.
Yeah. Yeah, she says the men who moved it last night hugged it when they moved it. There's all kinds of hugging.
You're right in that it was funny. I didn't. I think the only part that really made me actually laugh out loud was the line about my mommy says it came from heaven. I sort of stopped there and just had a little chuckle.
I liked that they hide with tour groups a few times during the day, and one of them, they mention that they hear some of the other children say, when visiting the Egyptian gallery, Sarah looks like Pharaoh, pass it on. And then Mrs. Frankweiler says, Sarah really does look like Pharaoh. And I'm like, wow, that's what you research? Okay. Mrs. Frankweiler is going to throw some shade on these incidental children.
Yeah, she gets real sassy. There was a certain point where she was getting snarky at him in the beginning about how the lawyer doesn't care about anything other than his family. And I was like, where did that come from? That's so mean. But then at the end, it makes sense why he's fretting about his family. Were there any moments when you were reading it that you stopped and you were like, oh yeah, when I was a kid, this part, blah?
I think the main thing is that I don't think I ever really connected with Claudia very much.
Sorry.
But and here's why. So like the real thing about this book and what it's sort of getting at, with Claudia in particular, is really a struggle to find her identity. There's a lot of talk about Claudia wanting to find a way to be different, and that clearly kind of like starts to come around to being she wants to sort of figure out who she is, right? Not that she necessarily is desperate to stand out, although that's part of it, but that she's kind of at an age where she's tired of just being a child, and to some degree children are all kind of the same, right? On some level, and she's looking for sort of the way to come into her own and like what she is really about. And this journey to the museum and her desire to like learn a new thing every day, and then her desperation to solve the mystery of Angel, um, all kinds of gives her that journey. Um, and I think I just never really got that beyond a surface level.
I don't know if I would have got that if I read it as a child, but at the end when she says, I knew that I was going to go home eventually, I just needed to go back different. Really, I felt like I really understood that, and I understood her a lot more as a character. I didn't necessarily like her any better, but
Yeah, they don't have to be together.
well, especially, when the chauffeur is like, yeah, neither child thanked me. I was like, ugh, they're so entitled. But I felt that wanting to go back different thing. I feel like every summer vacation, I always had this grand idea that when I got back to school, I would be different and cooler somehow. Because I was always really on the outcast level of my fellow students. And I think I always thought there would be some magical change that would happen where I'd come back and I would suddenly be interesting and I would have friends. That part resonated with me, remembering what childhood was like.
Yeah, it's it's a theme that I think I wasn't really equipped to understand, because it's not that it's like hidden. It's stated pretty clearly several times, especially late in the book, that that's what Claudia is looking for. But I think I probably always took it to be, sort of she wants to be the hashtag not like other girls or whatever, which might also be true, but is not the point. Jamie, though, he's just like, we had fun, wasn't that enough? And I was always like, Jamie, you're dumb.
He balanced her out though nicely. Whether it was just because he had sort of the apathy of being younger, or maybe he really was sort of more emotionally intelligent than her in some ways.
Yeah, Jamie isn't dumb. I just disagree with him on that point. But yeah, they play off each other well. Jamie is just very miserly and kind of just wants to exist. Like, he's not really looking for a purpose to life, and he doesn't really understand why Claudia wants to either.
I forget how old Jamie is.
He's 9 or 10, I forget. He's a couple years younger. But yeah, he saves his money, although it's a little unclear why. I guess for later. And he bets nickels on a game of war on the school bus every day, but he cheats. So yeah, Jamie is great, probably. At one point, they go to the library to look up stuff about Michelangelo. So they walk to the library, and they get there, and they find some books about Renaissance art and things like that. And Claudia basically assigns Jamie to look at the books with like a lot of the pictures and stuff while she goes through some of the other ones. And so later on, they see a marking that could be indicative of Angel being done by Michelangelo. And Jamie's like, oh, I've seen that. And she's like, what is it? And Jamie's like, you didn't tell me to read what the pictures were of. I remember what page it was on. And it's just like, Jamie, come on, buddy. What did you think she wanted? So I think it probably makes sense to talk a little about the author.
Yeah, I would like to know more about her for sure. I deliberately didn't read anything about her. I even waffled on reading that final note in the book, but
her afterward.
But by that point, I was too invested. I felt actually a little bit like how I talked about how Hatchet ended so abruptly. I felt like this ended so abruptly. Like Maybe it's just that I'm older now and it takes me, like, a little bit longer to get into a book, and then by the time I'm into it, and then it just ends if it's a kid's length book, and I'm just like, "No, I'm not done. I'm not done here. I need more details."
So, E.L. Konigsburg, she was born in New York, lived for much of her earlier life in Pennsylvania, and went to Carnegie Mellon for chemistry. Married a guy who was there for psychology. She pursued graduate level chemistry until she decided that lab science isn't fun, and I feel that. I also abandoned science at the college level because I didn't like lab science. And that's when she taught science in school for a little while, and when she met the headmistress, who was some of the basis for Mrs. Frankweiler. Um, but they had 3 children, and while she was raising those children, she got started to take art lessons, because we haven't really talked about it, but she did do all of the illustrations in this book as well. Um, Creative pursuits were not really a thing she had dealt much with until her adulthood. It wasn't like this passion she'd nurtured for a long time. So when her youngest child got old enough that they were going to school, she started to write in the mornings when the children were all away at school. And that's how we got to this book. And she basically sold this book and her other first novel. She sold those at the same time to the editor she would end up working with pretty much for her whole career, as far as I could tell. And both of them were actually Newbery Honors nominations. The Mixed Up Files won the medal, and Jennifer Hecate, etc., got a Newbery Honors award, which I believe she's one of 2 people I think I saw that has won the medal and an honors in the same year. She's also one of the only 6 people to win the medal twice. The second time in 1997 for The View from Saturday, which I haven't read.
Have you read Jennifer Hecate?
I have not, but I'm probably going to. This book's story came from a couple places. One of them was when she was picnicking with her family, and the children were complaining about sitting on the ground and the fact that there were bugs and and stuff. And she sort of mused to herself that, like, their idea of running away would be to run away somewhere really, like, posh, right? Then at a later time, at one point when she was taking art lessons at the Met, and would take her children there, and they would just kind of have to hang out in the museum while she was taking lessons, and then they would, like, look around a bit. There was one day when they saw in one of the sort of display rooms where they've set up, like, a whole room of, like, old furniture. They saw a piece of popcorn on a couch that was, like, well away from where the velvet ropes were. And so there was kind of this moment of, how did that get there? All the way over there where, like, people are not meant to be. You're not supposed to go that far. Like, where would you even get popcorn? And yeah, so that's kind of where the someone living in the museum after hours idea came from.
That's great. I love that. I really like the parallels between my first pick and your first pick, not just because of the subject matter, but also because of the authors. They both had a very similar life track where they had a career in the sciences and then said, ugh, no, I want to be a writer. After they'd already, done all that education and training.
Generally, Konigsburg's books are kind of known for not talking down to children and having plots with things like living in a museum and trying to figure out if a statuette was actually made by Michelangelo, which is not exactly like a plot that if you encountered it in the wild, you would say that's a children's book. But there it is.
I definitely enjoyed that, though, because, when I started the book, I was just sitting there like, what is the primary struggle going to be here? Them getting caught? And that's, when my brain started formulating that. Maybe they thwart a robbery thing, because that seems like a typical kids book thing, I guess. Probably, as you mentioned earlier, because of Home Alone.
Mm-hmm.
But
Yeah, it was definitely kind of a different sort of thing than most of the stuff I had read, and as a weirdo who liked learning about stuff like that, it definitely sort of spoke to me in a way that most books I was reading didn't. So yeah, that's the book.
I think because of that element, I I probably would have liked reading it as a kid, but I definitely know that I would have liked reading it as a kid better if I read it after Hatchet. Because, like I said, after Hatchet, I just started thinking about survival situations in every situation that I walked into. I would be in a building with my parents, and I would imagine where I would hide out in that building if there was a nuclear apocalypse or something like that. So
Yeah.
I could imagine little kid me reading this book and then thinking about what it would be like to hide out in a survival situation in a museum.
Yeah. Well, speaking of that, so I designed our discussion question for an event just like this. So,
Oh, good.
discussion question: if you were to run away and live in a museum, which museum would you live in?
Well, one would think, if they know me, that the natural answer would probably be the Museum of Natural History
Mm-hmm.
in New York. But if I were to run away, it would certainly not be to New York City.
That's the only problem with that museum that you have?
Primarily.
Mm-hmm. I get it.
I I don't mind New York. New York is fascinating, has a lot of interesting things, but if I was running away in some sort of needing to hide survival situation, New York City is not where you want to be. Too many people, too closed in. Yeah. I whew. Do you have an answer for this while I think?
Yeah. I did think about it a lot. A part of me would like to say the Natural History Museum in New York because I like it, but I know that you would never come visit me in the place that I would hang out, which is the undersea room.
Oh yeah.
So
No.
so that one gets bumped for that reason. This might be a little bit of a cheat, but it would probably be somewhere at the Smithsonian, and I think I land on uh, the Air and Space Museum ultimately, which is always one of my favorites. Partially because there's a lot of vehicles that you can kind of hide in, where there's like small chunks of plane recreated or whatever. Partially because the museum continues to have one of the shooting models of the USS Enterprise used in Star Trek, the original series. And I would just like to be able to see that every day. It's big, and and I mean, ultimately, like all the museums at the Smithsonian are within walking distance of each other, so it's a little bit of a cheat because I could go and during the day and visit a different museum. But like Claudia and Jamie left the museum, so you don't have to be in the museum all the time. Um, but yeah, I runner up is probably the Natural History Museum at the Smithsonian, which has a pretty solid dinosaur collection.
See, I'm just so torn. In my heart, the true answer would involve me going back in time.
Oh well, okay. I do have to asterisk. I know I shouldn't feel okay about this necessarily, but I do love the British Museum. It sucks that it has all these things that really should be returned to their original owners, but I like it.
Well, my go back in time answer is similar. I if I could add going back in time to this, it'd be the Crystal Palace.
Sure. Okay, so going back in time, you do the Crystal Palace, but if you didn't have a time machine, I'm also willing to expand this to like aquariums.
No.
I'm not sure if zoos count. Zoos are not sufficiently inside.
An aquarium I don't think would be sufficient because for the most part the space in the aquariums are not habitable by me. So less to hide in. I can't, jump into a tank to hide behind some coral.
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, I can, but that'd be uncomfortable. Oh, golly. I mean, can I pick the Natural History Museum up and plop it somewhere else?
No. I mean, there's other natural history museums, though.
But
and other comparable museums.
But I haven't been to them.
Well, I mean, you may just have to, I don't know, roll the dice and hope that the one you pick is good enough.
I want to be a smartass and say the Mothman Museum, but that's it's not a very big museum.
You are on board for a very modest experience there, huh?
I suppose the answer is the Natural History Museum, but I would, stay away from the whale room. That room is terrifying.
That's fine. I think
I'd say second place might be the Museum of Science in Boston.
Yeah, that's probably a good choice.
It's a fun little museum. It's not massive, but it's got a lot to learn.
Yeah,
a lot of info just scattered around.
So we end these things with giving our ratings in counts of giant peaches because we both like James and the Giant Peach. One of the relatively few books we had in common that we both really liked from this part of our lives. So I've waffled about this quite a bit. I'm afraid to give anything too high a rating immediately because then
I think
what happens?
the new person is supposed to give the rating because you gave the rating first last time.
Okay. Yeah, so
right,
go ahead and hit me with a rating.
I don't want you to be upset. But
I'm
I have
not
a
going to
reason.
be upset.
I'm giving this book 3.5 giant peaches. Because I want more. I want more detail about sneaking around. I just want to know more about everything. And I am completely affronted at how little information we have about Mrs. Frankweiler. So it's not because it's bad, it's because there was not enough.
But didn't you learn anything about the value of there being a mystery? Of not having answers?
No. I'll bump it to 3.75 giant peaches though, because you got me there.
Okay. I think I'm at 4.5. I don't want to start out and be like, this is the best. 5. 4.5 sounds like it might still be high in my brain. 4 feels low, and I'm not ready for the quarters. I just coming back to it. It was still very much the book that I remember loving. Now that I have developed from my formative stage, I still recognize a lot of, I think, why I am the way I am in this book. And I just, like I said, I think some of the humor and stuff hit me now in a way that I didn't get when I was younger. So it felt like also just a nice thing to come back to and find that I could still kind of.
A lot of the parts of the book that I really enjoyed definitely gave me this feeling of, okay, I can see some of the sparks of Brandon's humor forming here. Yeah. Especially my humor in writing, I think, is not dissimilar from the humor in this book. So yeah, I don't know if I can draw a straight line, but I can probably draw a line of some kind. Straight line is itself redundant because lines are by definition straight. If it's not a straight thing, it's not a line, Don't bring math into this.
Anyhow,
don't bring math into this, my goodness.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of My Dog Ate My Book Report. What are we going to be reading next time, Wren?
Oh, good golly. We're going to be reading The Mouse and the Motorcycle by Beverly Cleary. It's a super quick read, so if you want to join along, you should totally grab it.
My Dog Ate My Book Report is hosted and produced by Wren and Brandon, that's us, and edited by the fabulous Derrick Valen.
The music used in this podcast was licensed by Epidemic Sound. Transcripts were generated by Otter.ai. Our icon image was illustrated by Cindy Lau.
Have a question or comment for the team?
You can find us on our website, which links to all of our socials at dogatemybookraport.blueberry.net. That's BLUBRRY.net. Or by emailing at dogatemybookraport@gmail.
Blueberry doesn't like vowels. But anyway, yeah, we would be super excited to know what books you loved growing up.
Thanks for listening.